Today is all about H-1B visas. Changes have been announced, and they're fairly serious for both Canada and global employers. Hi, I'm Howard Greenberg.
Hi, I'm Hameed.
Well, the flavor of the week this week is the H-1B program and the changes announced by President Trump. Do you want to talk about it briefly?
Yeah, there's been a lot of concern. We've been speaking with companies around the world. Generally, as we know, if you're filing a new H-1B, there's an additional filing fee, very significant, $100,000 plus the prevailing wage. But where I'm getting a lot of concern from employers is how comfortable do they feel generally with relying on H-1Bs, irrespective of the policy going forward? Seems quite uncertain, and they're not sure where this is going to end up. And that's where Canada has become an increasingly interesting proposition in terms of how they deploy talent and what their alternative models could be.
The interesting thing about your observation, Noman, is that no one's really taken the discussion to the next step. Canada's an alternative, onshoring, but no one has suggested how is this going to work? How do employers leverage Canadian immigration to grab these H-1Bs who otherwise aren't going to the United States? And for the purposes of our viewers, I tell you that Noman and I has just been debating for the last 10 minutes off camera as to what it is we want to tell people about this program. And so maybe we should just bring the debate out. They're not going to be intercompany transfers, what would otherwise be L-1Bs in the United States. If they were L-1Bs, they qualified in that relationship, they had 1 out of 3 years, they'd be transferred as L-1Bs. H-1Bs have nothing to do with it. That's not the interest that these employers have. These are new hires coming to the United States. They're too expensive. So how do they get these new hires close to the United States, nearshoring, and not in the United States? And if they're going to do it in Canada, they're going to do it under LMIA. Heaven help us, the program wasn't designed for high volume intake. And something else, unless you disagree with me.
Partly. So I find the discussions getting a little bit deeper now with employers. They're not comfortable. This is the beginning, potentially. We see an H-1B uncertainty. It was uncertain as to how it applied. And going forward, could there be more changes? How committed are you to investing into U.S. immigration when the changes come unannounced and have significant impact? So employers are starting to think about a fresh approach to the entire idea of supporting their U.S. workforce. And I think that's where Canada comes into play. And I think the Prime Minister has suggested that there will be a new program very much focused on trying to attract the best tech workers, seeing that the H-1B may not be as popular going forward. This opens up a lot of possibilities, I would think, if you're an employer in Canada.
Well, I think it's larger than you've even imagined, because over 80% or approximately 80% of the H-1B applicants are Indian applicants on their way, to U.S. and customers to do programming and technical assistance. When you open up a program like this, you're not going to open it up to just to Indian programs. So if you open it up to the world, Canada is going to be inundated with people who meet the basic requirements, which is likely going to be, if it looks like an H-1B, a degree in a professional area.
Right.
Work experience, probably not significant. And if you're not just doing an H-1B type scenario, it could come from everywhere. And so the question is, how much will Canada absorb? Will it have to be dependent on a job offer? Will the job offer have to be for a certain duration? Will there have to be a guarantee that the individual will leave Canada after, so that we don't end up with all these H-1Bs today that are still here 5 years from now and they couldn't become PRs?
All right. Well, look, there's two parts to that. There's also a human part. Applicants are calling. Applicants are not comfortable going through a process with uncertainty in their families. So I think they're thinking too, they may not be willing to go to the U.S. under this environment. So Canada could be attractive.
Right.
To your point about policy, isn't this the time where Canada should think about, in the technology sector, what are the most critical skills, and design a program where we bring those people in, maybe even connect it to our PR program to keep them long term?
And what's the role of an employer? Is it more of the U.S. type scenario where it's a petition by an employer? And then what's the responsibility of the employer? And then Uh, Given how many foreign workers there currently are in Canada and temporary residents, are they staying short-term or long-term? This thing is going to have to be thought out a bit.
Right.
You could open a door here and have a real problem closing it.
Well, we know in the last experiment with H-1B holders, it was an open work permit. And after putting out 10,000 invitations, very few people entered. But I think the circumstances are a little different now. And I think getting employer participation would be add a lot of strength and merit to the application.
So I tell our viewers to stay tuned. We've got a lot more to say about this as it unfolds.
All right.
Noman, it occurs to me that we should complete this discussion with a discussion about nearshoring. This discussion so far in this presentation concentrated on capturing these H-1B applicants who would otherwise go to the United States and bring them to Canada. But there's another aspect. There's work that these H-1Bs do in North America under global contracts, and these contracts still continue and must be accomplished by individuals who might be in the same time zone or involved cross-border. It does make sense in those circumstances for employers to intercompany transfer employees to Canada to assume the nearshoring responsibilities that would otherwise been conducted by the H-1Bs in the United States.
Provided that it's contemplated properly in those agreements and permissible with client consent.
So this is another interesting aspect of what's going to evolve. Contracts aren't Canadian contracts or US contracts. They're global contracts. They're North American contracts. And services are provided for many key locations in the world. And staff is going to have to be built up in Canada to compensate for the lack of services that'll be available in the United States with these workers not being able to enter or not choosing to enter.
Correct. And you properly note that Canadian immigration categories did not contemplate these scenarios. We know ESDC is a little tighter in terms of what type of contracts are permissible.
Right.
The intercompany transfer, that's a broader consideration, but one would have to make sure you've taken a compliance first approach to make sure there's justification.
So I think that IRCC, ESDC policymakers are going to understand a new reality about doing business. That, Carney already understands he has to diversify and he has to reach out around the world to make up for the relationship that's diminished to the United States. So too is it going to be with the labor and providing services. This is a whole new era for cross-border labor.
And you bring some interesting points up. You're talking about nearshoring, but we know that there are some directives about concerns of workers working entirely remotely in Canada. So I think employers need to step back and figure out how do you structure an appropriate arrangement for such workers that fit within the spirit of the immigration provisions. Even if it's not clearly listed, there's probably best practices one should consider.
So there's a lot of planning and strategizing by Canadian employers and maybe even U.S. Companies who are involved in North American projects. Canada is ideally suited from many points of view in terms of labor for local market and labor for onshoring market.
If structured properly.
Now, we'd be very interested in hearing your comments, your views, and questions. Please feel free to reach out. This is just the beginning of a very important change in Canadian immigration, and you want to be a part of it if you need skills in Canada or if you have those skills and you want to position yourself in Canada. Hi, I'm Howard Greenberg.
Hi, I'm Naman Hameed.
Well.
well.
Yeah. Okay, here we go again. I'm Howard Greenberg.
Hi, I'm Naman. Okay. Employers will be required to pay a $100,000 filing fee per worker. We do it again. Sorry, I said P.